This paper was presented at the JCT Traffic Signal Symposium 2024, thanks to our media partner Highways News, and sponsored by AGD Systems, Four-Way Consulting, Traffic Group Signals, Smart Micro UK, TRL Software, PTV Group, Census Networks, and Starling Technologies.
Good morning. So, why did the sparrow cross the road? Well, we may or may not have a punchline to that. We'll find out later. But what we are here to do today is to take you through Hampshire County Council's first Sparrow Crossing, which is located on a dual carriageway, Petersfield Road in Havant. My colleague, Mark Andrews, and myself have been involved with the development of the Sparrow Crossing at this particular site, from inception all the way through to installation. And we'd like to take you through some of the challenges that presented to us. Firstly, a little bit of background. Hampshire County Council were successful in securing Transforming Cities funding for the Department of Transport for a number of corridor schemes throughout the county. One of these was in Havant, and this particular scheme was focused on active travel, promoting cycling and pedestrian accessibility. The scheme was along a corridor called Elmley Road, and it ran between Havant Railway Station and the Havant and South Downs Sixth Form College. One of the principles of the scheme was to try and embed in students that to use active transport is one of their modes of getting around, and that they would continue that throughout the rest of their lives. The scheme itself has a continuous segregated cycle and pedestrian route along its full entirety. There are three different forms of crossing along the route. One of them is a parallel crossing. There's also a priority pedestrian and cycle crossing. And then there was also an improvement to an existing staggered puffin crossing. This is an overview of the scheme in its entirety. In the bottom right-hand corner is the Havant Railway Station. And then running from east to west is Elmley Road, which is the corridor that's been treated. Along there is a parallel crossing, the priority pedestrian crossing. And then in the top left-hand corner is the site of the Sparrow Crossing on the dual carriageway. And then just beyond that, top left-hand corner is the college itself. So, why a Sparrow Crossing? Well, at the outset, there was on Petersfield Road an existing staggered puffin crossing, and our first thought was, well, perhaps we should just upgrade that to two toucan staggered crossings. However, this didn't really sit well with us for a number of reasons. Firstly, there wasn't really didn't really fit in with the segregated pedestrian and cycle routes along the rest of the corridor. Secondly, there wasn't really space on the centre island to get the shared use and linkage between the two parts of the crossing. And thirdly, we didn't really felt or fitted in with the high quality solution the rest of the scheme was looking to deliver. So we elected to go with the Sparrow Crossing. In the context of this presentation, what we mean by a Sparrow Crossing is a segregated cycle and a segregated pedestrian crossing alongside one another. Having established that, the site itself, being on a dual carriageway, presented us with a number of design challenges in terms of the layout. The first thought we had was, well, again, why don't we just go with a staggered arrangement with two Sparrow crossings, one on each carriageway? However, the issue with this was that there was insufficient width on the central island to get the continuous and segregated pedestrian and cycle linkages between the two parts of the crossing. However, we did want to provide a high level of facility for cyclists, and for that reason we decided to go with straight across single phase movement across both carriageways and the centre island for the cyclists. Having established that, we thought, well, what do we do for the pedestrians? Again, we thought, well, do we continue with the segregated pedestrian crossing? However, one of the issues with that was that the distance between the traffic stop line through the cycle crossing to the furthest offset of the pedestrian crossing was actually quite lengthy, leading to long intergreen times and not a particularly efficient operation. We then thought, well, why don't we replicate what we did for the cyclists and just have a single straight across pedestrian crossing? However, the distance from one side to the other was in the order of about 16 to 17 metres. We felt this was quite excessive, leading to long clearance times. It would also perhaps be quite intimidating for some less mobile pedestrians, and others may just consider it as two-part crossing anyway. So we decided then to go with the inline two-part crossing. However, the centre island wasn't actually wide enough to achieve that. So we had to actually reduce the running carriageways down slightly in order to provide the 5 metres minimum offset between the two-part crossing. Hand across now to Mark, who's going to take you through the control methodology.
As Jonathan said, the site really wasn't suited to a dual-phase inline pedestrian crossing, so a single phase was required. The carriageway widths and separation distance, as Jonathan said, not really allowing that to be achievable. However, the stage 1 road safety audit noted there was a potential for cyclists to cross when their adjacent traffic stream was at red, not noticing that the opposite side was still had a green. We also noted that early on that the width of the crossing, should a cyclist use the facility on their own, we would need to allow them to do so without pedestrians to maintain an efficient operation of the traffic without the delays associated with pedestrian phase operating of the whole width of the crossing. In order to achieve as smooth an operation as possible for cyclists, the controller was required to ripple change. In the event the controller is already running one of the pedestrian phases, when the cycle demand is received, the controller will ripple into the cycle stage, maintaining the already operating pedestrian phase. A further call for the other pedestrian in that stage is then allowed, but on demand if needed. To minimise the delay for cycles, early detection of their arrival was required. To this end, AGD 318 detectors have been employed to place the demand before the cyclist arrives at the crossing, such that in most instances the cycle phase is actually starting or just about to start as the cyclist arrives at the crossing itself. The AGDs in this case were also used to extend the cycle green phase, which operates as a traffic phase, to allow any cyclist to cross as well if they're following close by. Once in the cycle stage, the cycle will hold the greens for all the operating phases until all the minimums or extensions have been achieved. And then during the initial testing of the controller, it was noted that the minimum green times for pedestrians could, whilst in the cycle stage, allow a forward call to be placed after the green phase had terminated for the pedestrian. This meant that it was necessary for the call to be placed during the green phase itself, so that there wasn't this requirement for it to be called a second time unnecessarily. To this end, the call timer has actually been set and fixed to be lower than the minimum green pedestrian time. With the controller attempting to run a cyclic order as per normal, a repeat of the stage 2 pedestrian crossing was placed in at stage 4 in the sequence. However, during the configuration, this was then amended with conditioning to allow the controller to move from stage 3 back to stage 2. This allows the controller to maintain some degree of semblance of a two-stream crossing whilst wholly operating within the single stream. It was also identified that pedestrians may cross during stage 5 without having actually placed a physical demand on a push button. In order to protect these pedestrians, as much as possible, the dummy phase is operated with the cycle phase. The clearance times from the on-crossing detectors extend the dummy phase clearance periods rather than the cycle phase clearance periods. Again, during testing, we noticed a normal pedestrian phase would automatically revert back to the traffic stage. However, with this site having to operate very much as a junction, it was noted that during testing, there were situations where the controller could actually hang on a pedestrian phase waiting for a traffic phase demand to be received. In order to prevent this from happening, a revertive traffic demand was then placed as soon as the controller lost its green for the traffic. So again, it just reversed immediately back to the traffic phase when the pedestrians been served. As previously mentioned, the cycle phase operates as a traffic phase. Normal on-crossing detection extensions would not have been applicable in this situation. So the on-crossing detection on the cycle phase actually extends all red clearance periods as it would through normal traffic. Low-level cycle indicators have been used as primary and secondary signals to allow maximum visibility for the crossing on the approaches. These have been carefully aligned to minimise the potential for other users to see them when not intended, i.e. we don't want traffic to see them. Cycle phase push buttons have been set to the left hand of the user rather than the traditional right hand for a crossing. The cycle is actually bi-directional, so they cross as per drive. So it's usual UK driver standards. When aligning and commissioning the AGD 318 units, a cyclist was brought along to allow the units to be correctly positioned to minimise the potential for the detection, maximise the potential for detection whilst minimising the risk of other road users triggering demand. A small issue we should have anticipated but didn't notice until the site was being installed. The core usually used to power the weight indicators was actually being used on this to drive the amber light for the low-level cycle indicators. This meant a slight modification was needed in the configuration so that the weight detectors were actually then driven from a switched sign output. So it's been widely appraised within the local community. Local cycle groups have appreciated the Sparrow's benefits. And the cycle groups are actually very keen to see this rolled out on a much wider basis throughout the authority. During the course of the construction, the impacts and benefits of the scheme were identified such that the scheme was actually extended. The initial scheme didn't continue down to the railway crossing, to the railway station, but that was changed within the works. We have this very quick video, which I'm sure will play if I press this, which is just one of our councillors telling us how wonderful we are.
Hello, we're here on Petersfield Road in Havant. We're looking at the new crossing behind us, which is part of a wider scheme, and this is the first Sparrow Crossing in Hampshire. So what it does is to have a separate crossing for cyclists and for pedestrians, and the crossing for cyclists has a sensor that can sense when cyclists are coming along so that the lights change to enable them to freely cross the road without having to wait for too long.
This is a brilliant scheme. We're really impressed with it, and it's going to link Havant town centre with the college. It's absolutely brilliant, and if we can get the college students cycling, that's a lesson they'll learn for life.
It's a great scheme. It runs all the way around the area here, and it's helping people get around the town centre far more freely.
This is a great scheme because it means that we can encourage local people, particularly young ones coming to Havant College, to walk or cycle using the new facilities here.
As a person who takes people out for cycle rides, trike rides for people with loneliness and depression, I have to cycle quite big trikes, and this crossing is easy to cross with a trike. And so that I think the more we have this in the borough, the better.
I'd be surprised if we don't have a million questions for you guys, but do we have any questions? Andy.
With the success of this one, are you looking at rolling out to any other areas of Hampshire?
Yes, we would like to. That very much depends on the funding that we receive through Capital. So, yeah, we would certainly like to. Whether we're able to or not, it's down to the funding.
Thank you.
Do we have any more questions? I've got a question, actually. As that's just been put in, have you been monitoring when was it opened, and how long have you been monitoring since it's been opened, the usage of it?
It was opened not quite a year ago now, actually. We have done extensive monitoring at the start of the end of the scheme, start of the monitoring, but since then it's sort of tapered off, and just keep occasionally looking at it. But yeah, it does seem to be used very well. Cyclists are still being detected, as we hoped they would be, well in advance. There's plenty of cyclists now using the whole of the scheme. I mean, part of that video, you noticed there was actually the whole of the project all the way through, so there's a few crossings there. It does seem to have, from my perception at least, increased cycling in the area.
Yeah. And has that, even though funding is sometimes a challenge, do you think that's something that actually you've already identified other locations for it and seen the success of what's happened already?
There is actually a potential for another Sparrow to go in immediately around the corner from this site, which will connect you up to the wider network. And there's another Sparrow that's been included already in Elmley. So yeah, there is movement to introduce these segregated facilities. Brilliant. You're very much dependent on the fact that you've got segregated cycle and pedestrian usage in the area. But
excellent. And that's clearly provoked two questions. We've got two questions over there.
Mark Bladell again. Stage 3, you're running, if I recall this correctly, you're running the cycles across as a vehicle phase, but you're running the PEDs only halfway. Yeah? I could see a situation on the west to east crossing where PEDs waiting on red would see the cycles moving. Have you got any indication at all that you might be inviting pedestrians to move into the carriageway? The segregation is good, yes, but they will be looking at the approaching traffic, which is going to be in the same direction as the cyclists are moving. Yep. Did you consider that?
Yes, we did, yeah. Okay. This is what we're saying partway through. What we've actually done is recognise that the pedestrians may decide to cross without pressing the button. We've got a dummy phase that runs effectively as a pedestrian phase. It doesn't illuminate the pedestrian phase. And the dummy phase then controls the on-crossing times for the whole of the crossing rather than the two separate halves.
Thank you.
And a question just behind you, actually.
Hi, Luke Cathy from Barnsley Council. I just wondered if you still needed DFT traffic sign approval to use these markings, or if it given blanket approval now.
Yeah, the markings are on there, as far as we're aware, Chapter 6 compliant, so we didn't feel that we needed particular site-specific authorisation for those. No.
All right, thank you very much.
Got time for one more question? Yes, brilliant. We've got one more question. I knew as soon as I said. So we've got one more question there.
Yeah, hi, Mark here at ACOM. Similar question from down at the front, really, I suppose, in line with, given that there is an optional crossing in 2 and 3 on the PEDs, was it considered to provide somewhat of a stagger in there to help emphasise that they are 2 separate control phases as opposed to a single movement?
We did consider some form of stagger, but as we said quite early on, it's the problem you've got with doing any form of stagger. It increases the separation and therefore the in-between time from pedestrians back to traffic. To try and make it as snappy and quick moving as we could, in that respect, we went for the inline but increased the separation in the centre, the 5 metre clearance between the two. The problem is it's actually quite a busy road and it potentially could get slightly busier, but so it's realistically capacity more than that. But yeah, we did consider staggering, even just slightly offsetting them.
Yeah,
you know, half a crossing.
Down a similar line, the pedestrian on the other side could see traffic stopped and assume that they've also got an invitation to cross and step out into live traffic.
Yeah, I think with the staging we've got, particularly at stage 5, we've got the diagram there. If the cycles are demanded, then the pedestrian crossings will both appear.
I'm just thinking, so like a pedestrian might one day see stage 5 where they've got a green all the way across. The next day they might press the button. May not be a cycle demand, and they'd only have one of the 2 phases of green. Yeah,
I mean, it's interesting. I mean, I was a bit concerned myself with the inline arrangement because we hadn't put that in elsewhere. But from monitoring it from day one, the vast majority of people did consider it as 2 separate crossings. They didn't walk out into the second one unknowingly.
I guess the width, it helps emphasise.
Yeah, and I think it's probably helped by the fact that there was already an existing staggered puffing crossing there. So they had already got used to the fact over many years that there were two elements to the crossing. It wasn't just one continuous
Well, it's been in a while now, obviously, so I guess it's you've not seen that issue happening. But yeah.
No.
I designed one very similar, but we put a stagger in that for that sole reason, where you've got that so that you don't get any. It's certainly less risk that someone foresees one as being green or.
Keep looking at you in case I'm not allowed. Good. Well, actually, we have a question over here first.
A completely different question, really. Any conflict between the actual cyclist and the pedestrian at each end, at each side of the road?
On one side, they are fully segregated for quite an extensive amount of the route, so there is no conflict whatsoever. On the college side, we was a little bit compromised in the landing area where it needs to drop back into shared. But there's quite a degree of separation and segregation between them before they are led into the shared area. So that there isn't a great deal of conflict at all.
Okay. So
the only issue we tended to find, certainly in the early stages, was occasionally a pedestrian would go to the cycle crossing and wonder where the push button was because it wasn't to the left hand. In one particular instance, I actually was on site as I saw this, and I informed the guy that the pedestrian crossing is over there, press that button. So he dutifully went over, pressed the button, and then walked back to the cycle crossing for some bizarre reason. But you can't account for people, can you?
It was really, so when they come off the cycling, one want to go in left, the other one to go right.
They're separated behind, and then there's the re-merge behind it, so that they don't cross immediately.
Okay.
There's a landing area for them to sort themselves out, shall we say.
Okay, so it's geometrical design.
Yeah, plenty of tactile paving.
And we have one last question here.
Two slight questions in one. One is the capacity, because obviously you've taken it down from a dual carriageway to a single carriageway. So have you got any speed compliance issues? And the other one is, have you had any complaints about the motorists actually saying, we haven't got the capacity anymore?
It wasn't actually taken down to a single carriageway. There was enough carriageway width to narrow it down, so we've got slightly narrower dual carriageway lanes. And no, we haven't had it. Coming off one side of the, there's a roundabout, so the speeds are quite low, and that's never had. But we still got the SDE on the other approach.
The other thing that we would have is we've got different safety auditors. I'm from National Highway, sorry, I'm Jonathan Flynn, I should say. And we've got different safety auditors, and they all look at things differently. And did you have any contrary safety audits? Because that's what we end up doing. Sometimes we have more than one safety audit at different stages by different people, and they bring up different issues during the life of the design or the installation. And therefore, it can be, we get a green light at one point, but then we get an amber or a red light at another point. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. It's actually something we were discussing on the car coming up yesterday. Depending on who you go to, you get very different safety audit response. No, our safety audits are all completed in-house by Hampshire County Council safety audit team.
So are you then leading them to the decision that you want, or are they completely independent?
They're completely independent. Fortuitously, in this case, one of them is actually a very keen cyclist.
Okay, thank you.
Brilliant, thank you. If you would like to make a warm sort of thank you to our colleagues here.